The Fulbright Scholarship is without a doubt one of the most prestigious fellowships in the world. Worth up to $500,000, this scholarship funds thousands of people to attend the United States every single year, to attend the top institutions like Harvard, MIT, Stanford, and everything in between. Today, what I thought I'd do is share my experience applying for the Fulbright Scholarship and explaining how I became a national finalist for Australia. And in doing so, through sharing my application, through sharing all the documents that I use for my interview preparation, and finally sharing the interview questions that I got asked, what I'm hoping is that it will make you guys have a more successful journey than what I did. Now, let's get started into this video. This is going to be the first of a roughly 10-part series where I cover each of the scholarships that I was at minimum a national finalist for, and in doing so, just hopefully shed light on scholarships that are generally quite ambiguous, and lacking in information. The reason that I'm starting with the Fulbright Scholarship is because it is without a doubt one of the longest and most difficult applications that you have to do for any worldwide scholarship. Not only is there 3 recommendation letters, a 3 to 4 page resume, and an endless number of random questions, but there's also a 1-page personal statement, 2 1-page impact statements, and then finally a 3-page referenced study objective. So I'm going to walk you through each of those. I'm going to put up screenshots of everything that I've used, and also all of the documents are going to be contained in a Google Drive, which you can find in the description below. It'll contain all of my files and everything that you guys need to find success, hopefully, in your own Fulbright journey. So the application itself has many sections, and it took me around 3 months to write my application from start to finish. So you've got to start early with the Fulbright. This is one you can't do the night before. So the first thing you need to do is just list kind of your experiences, professional experiences, awards. So the types of things that they expect you to do are your scholarships and fellowships. So what previous scholarships have you received? Your academic honors and prizes. So what awards have you won throughout your life? Then your book publications, your teaching experience, and finally any research experience that you have. So they're just trying to really get a good sense of your being. You have 250 words for each of those sections, and it's important to understand that if you don't have book publications or if you don't have many awards, that doesn't mean that you're ineligible. They're not expecting you to have an abundance of answers for these. For instance, I didn't have any teaching experience at the time, so I really couldn't put anything down for that, but that doesn't disadvantage you. They're just trying to understand every single applicant and fill in the gaps for those applicants. The next thing you'll need to do is put down your academic information. So where did you study? What was your GPA? And what was your weighted average mark? They also need you to attach an official transcript, so that's really important. The next step is your professional experience, and this is probably where we start to get into the real meat of the application. So you can put down as many professional experiences as you want. Basically, it's just a CV, but for their application portal itself. So you just put down the institution that you worked at, what was the title of the role, and what were the dates. There's no opportunity for a description there. I personally put down 10 different experiences that I had. I think I would keep it to 10 maximum, just because otherwise the application will go on forever. And the next thing you have is your resume. So anywhere between 2 pages and 4 pages, I would suggest, is your resume. For this application, I actually had a 4-page resume, which was a bit ridiculous, to be honest. In hindsight, I probably would have cut it down to maybe 2 or 3 pages, just because no one's going to read a 4-page resume, and that was probably to my own demise. You have opportunities to put your book publications earlier, your research experience. So there's other places where you can talk about that, and you don't want to bog them down in an endlessly long application. But I'll attach screenshots of my resume that I used, again, in the description as well. So be sure to check out that Google Drive for all the relevant documents here today. Now we get into the meat of the application, which is the written component. And I have all my written applications on this piece of paper. And I reckon I've printed about a solid 20 pages of writing. Like, that's how much writing you have to do for this scholarship. It's insane. So let's just run through, before we get into the study objectives and the personal statements, let's run through what are the preliminary questions that they expect you to do. These all actually don't have word limits, which is important to factor in, but I would say keep it to no more than 500 words maximum. The first question is, briefly describe the area of the field in which you plan to specialize in the United States. Okay, what is your field of interest? What area are you going to study in? You really just want to answer, why does it matter and why do you care about it? Those are kind of the general questions that you're going to be answering there. I think mine was roughly 300 words based on what I can see there. The next question is, please describe your future plans. Again, no word limit. but I structured mine around, I think I went to about 500 words. I said, what are my 3 key ambitions in the short term? And then how's this going to play out in the long term? So you can have a read of that in your own spare time. Now, the next one is really meaty. So you have to write down 4 universities that you want to apply for and give the reasons specifically as to why you want to apply to those universities. So I put Harvard, Stanford, UPenn, and Columbia, and I had to do a deep dive into each of the programs and explain exactly why I wanted to apply to each of them. So it's a lot. There's a lot that needs to be accomplished. I put about 400, 500 words for each, which in hindsight was a bit excessive. I would say keep it to about 300 words. Your reasons have to be unique and specific for each program. The benefit is when you apply for the grad schools later on in the year, you'll have this to go off of to help you craft your personal statements for the grad schools, which is great. So those are the preliminary questions, and that's just getting kind of to the scraping the surface of what is expected for this scholarship. Now we get into the real meat, which is the study objective, the personal statement, and the 2 impact statements. This is the main crux of your application and the thing that they're going to focus most on. So the first thing is a referenced 3-page study objective. And in your study objective, you need to achieve 5 main things. So the first thing is to explain what degree you want to study. The second thing is why you're interested in the field in which you're planning on applying for. The third is how you're going to use the research and the degree that you study to drive great impact in Australia. The third is how is this field relevant to the current challenges that are faced in your home country? In my case, it was Australia, but how is it a challenge for your home country? The fourth is how are you going to apply your studies upon returning to Australia? And then the fifth, and this is probably the most unique thing about the Fulbright, is how will you build lasting bilateral partnerships with your host institution or host area and use those partnerships when you return to Australia to drive impact. So that's really what they're interested in there. And you've got 3 pages. You require references as well. Again, in the Google Drive, you can read my 3-page study objective, and hopefully that'll give you a good way to structure it. The way in which I structured it is I spoke about the issues that are faced in Australia currently. That's how I opened. I talked, obviously, education was my field of interest, so I talked about the problems that are in Australia's education system, the potential that education technology holds to be able to fix those trends, then what my background was and what I hope to do in the future for the field of EdTech. And then finally, my last page was fully dedicated to why I want to study in the United States specifically, why I want to study at Harvard, and how my work in the future after studying at Harvard is going to benefit millions of young Australians. So that's how I structured my 3-page study objective. I had around 8 references for that study objective, and it took me probably 2 or 3 months to craft. That 3 pages took a long time to write up. The next thing that you get to do is a personal statement. You only get 1 page to be able to write about it, but essentially what they're interested in is not necessarily what are your accomplishments, but what's your story? You know, why do you care about the field that you care about? Why are you so passionate about it? What specific experiences, whether they be great or traumatic, have triggered this interest in your specific field? And why do you really care about the work that you plan to do in the future? It's about convincing them that you really genuinely care about the field that you're going to go into and why it matters that this work that you plan to do is done within your home country. That's really what they're looking into. They're looking for that narrative. They want to learn more about you, understand the person behind you. So don't go into your professional experiences. Really tell a story about your childhood, about your upbringing, and the experiences that triggered your interest in your field. And then the final 2 things, on top of that 1-page personal statement and your study objective, is you need to submit 2 impact statements. The first is a statewide impact statement, which is how does your work benefit your state? How do you plan to return to your state within your country to drive impact? And then the second one is a nationwide impact statement, which is how do you plan to impact your entire nation? These can be quite similar. Because they're reviewed by 2 separate committees. They just allow you to be eligible for different specific scholarships. So yeah, you also have to write those. Again, if you want to read mine, they will be in the description. And then the final thing you need to submit is a writing sample. This is just evidence that you have a strong writing background and that you can produce great work. So for me, I submitted the literature review of my thesis, just to show them that I have this background in research and that I'm more than happy to be able to continue that in the US, but you might have other pieces of work that you're really proud of. So after you've spent months writing all of those documents up, and you've found 3 people to submit recommendation letters for you, you can post off your Fulbright application for that year. I know it's a lot, but it's really going to set you up for future scholarships when you're applying. Like the Fulbright is just what I call the everything scholarship, where they want to know everything about you. And what that means is you can use these as templates for future scholarships that you apply for. And after all of that, if you're lucky enough, you'll get invited for an interview. It'll be in your local state and you'll have a panel of around 8 experts. They probably won't be experts in your field. They're just well-respected and notable people within your home state. Some of them may be past Fulbright scholars. A lot of them will be well-seasoned travelers or have studied over in the US. And so essentially what they'll be doing in that interview is trying to find out a lot more about you and to see if you're the right fit for the Fulbright Scholarship. In the Google Drive, I have attached all the different documents that I used to prep for my Fulbright interview. I did so much research into the types of questions that could be asked, and I made exhaustive documents that allowed me to prep holistically for everything that I could be asked for. So from anything about my personal upbringing to how I'm going to be a great ambassador for Australia, I had the full spectrum of every type of question that can get asked. I've redacted my own answers from those documents because they're very personal. But what I would say is go through them, type out answers to every single one, just bullet points, key points for every single answer. And in doing so, that will help you to be prepared. But I want to talk about my interview specifically, the questions that I got asked, and what I would do differently if I was to go again. So the Fulbright interview is incredibly unique because what they're really focused on, what their values are centered around, is this idea of bilateral partnerships and ambassadorship and sharing your culture and breaking down tensions between countries through this cultural exchange. That's what they're really focused on, and that's what makes the Fulbright unique. What that means is that a lot of the questions you're going to get asked are actually to do with those specific values. It's not, can you name a time you were a leader or a time that you dealt with an uncomfortable situation? They're asking quite hard-hitting questions, and I'm going to go through the exact ones that I was asked last year to help you understand. So I rocked up to my interview. I was the first one interviewed for the day of interviews for Western Australia. I believe there was 12 candidates, and in the end they took 2 from Western Australia. There were 8 panelists. They were all experts. None knew about education specifically, and I had 20 minutes for my interview window, and they were lovely. They were very supportive, very helpful throughout the process. It was my first big interview ever for a scholarship, and I was super nervous, but they made me feel right at home, and after the first question, I was fine. So these were the questions that I got asked that I can remember. And it didn't go in this order. It's important to remember that. These are just what I remember getting asked. One of the questions was, what does it mean to be Australian? Another one was, how will you promote Australian values and culture in the US? The next one was to do with, how will you form enduring bilateral partnerships that will benefit Australia in the long term? How will you be a great ambassador? And do you have an experience being an ambassador? Then the more generic ones. So why your chosen course and why the US specifically, i.e. why not the UK? Explain your expertise and background in your field, and what examples do you have of creating change? And the final one is, would you be happy if we placed you in an institution that didn't match your preferences? In other words, if you didn't get into your top 4 schools, would you be happy to still go to the United States? So those were the questions that I got asked. And as you can see, they didn't really have much to do with who I was as a person or the application that I submitted. They're very unique and additional information that wasn't really spoken too much about in my application. The reason that I think that the interview didn't go as successfully as I'd hoped it would was for 2 main reasons. The first is I was 22 at the time, and I was versing much more experienced applicants than myself. At the opening of my interview, they said it's so nice to see someone so young being in this final round interview for this scholarship. And so that's never really a good sign. But it's not an excuse, because there are 22-year-olds that win it all the time. The real reason that I would say that I didn't win is I didn't answer the question. And that sounds so silly, because it's like, of course I could answer the questions. But what I think I was doing was I was using the question as a springboard for what I thought the panelists wanted to hear. And what I've come to realize, having applied for so many of these scholarships, is they already know who you are. They've read your application in and out, they know everything about you. So you don't need to keep telling them about all your great professional experiences and trying to tie it back to specific stories. Just answer the question that they're asking you. Keep your response to 2 to 3 minutes, keep it very concise and very focused on exactly what they're asking you. Because at the end of the day, they have to keep it systematic. They don't go off vibes or a feeling or how likable you are. They are assessing you on your ability to answer predetermined questions, and they're giving you a mark based on that. So if you don't specifically answer that question step by step, if you divert or go on a tangent and try to impress them, what you're actually doing is just not allowing them to mark you on that specific question. So those are two of the reasons that I probably didn't win. I also just maybe wasn't a strong enough applicant at that time and still needed maybe another 6 to 8 months to really build out my professional experiences. So that's my story. That's my journey of the Fulbright Scholarship. I really hope that helps set some context, gives you guys some ideas. Again, most of the value will be found in that Google Drive below. I highly recommend you go through, have a read of my documents, and hopefully that will help you to write your own documents and to get some inspiration of how you can tackle each component of this ginormous Fulbright application. But otherwise, I'll be back next week with another video. Thank you so much for the support over the last couple months. I really appreciate it. And we will be tackling another big scholarship next week. So good luck.